As you know, we're always talking about the carbon paw print and about being as sustainable as we possibly can, really to help save the planet. So that's why we're meeting up with Will Green to discuss sustainability in the raw pet food market particularly, but also across other levels of the pet industry. I'm Anna Webb. Welcome to A Dog's Life. Will, welcome to London and welcome to A Dog's Life.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to see you again.
It's brilliant, and I love it because we're in our favourite spot actually for recording podcasts, a shady glade on Hampstead Heath.
Beautiful, love it.
And I'm so excited about today's conversation because it is about sustainability, isn't it, Will?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a top issue that I think most people should be discussing.
And it's very close to your heart because you've done an awful lot of research around this in your own capacity, really, as a very interested human in this issue, but also as a consultant, really. And you've done a report which I've read and it's fascinating. A lot went over my head. But explain what that report was and how this is potentially, can I say, revolutionise the raw food feeding community in terms of the big argument that sits around it being sustainability.
Yeah, of course. So I'm studying a global MBA at the University of Winchester. The university has a focus on sustainability. So throughout the research and different modules that I'm studying, there's always a focus on sustainability. So every single product that we do, research or just kind of general reading, it has to be focused on sustainability. And what I was looking at was sustainability in the pet food industry, but particularly looking at raw dog food companies and how really there's a already existing sustainable model, but we could actually make it better. I think the part that is a bit more cutting edge that I've done is I've used some tools that I usually use for other things, but to do an analysis of the whole kind of product life cycle, to suggest changes across the board that could make the products as sustainable as you could get.
So it's so now, isn't it? It's brilliant. I mean, from what I got from it, you use things like, am I right, is it the Ellen MacArthur Foundation?
Yeah.
And her inspiration for sustainability, like a good few years ago, right? Yeah. When she noticed the huge amount of plastic that was in our seas.
Absolutely, yeah. So Ellen MacArthur is based in the Isle of Wight, which is quite local to us. And her foundation are basically funding and pushing forwards the cutting edge research in sustainability. They're developing existing tools like the Mobius loop, which I think we've discussed as well.
What's that exactly?
So everyone probably doesn't know the name, but they've probably seen it. You know the loop with the 3 arrows? And it's reduce, reuse and recycle. Right. So that is the Mobius loop. It was developed in the 70s, but really the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have taken that a step further. So what I didn't realise until I did this research is there's actually a hierarchy to that. So reduce is the first thing that we should be doing, then reusing things, then recycling.
So it's like this 3-prong approach.
Exactly, yeah.
And I guess, some products or services might fit into those prongs perhaps a bit easier than others. Like, I don't know, with a black cab, for example, if it runs on electricity, I suppose that's ticked a big... But yeah, exactly. But, how would that apply then to raw food?
So what I've done is I've taken that as... I've taken every single area to do with raw feeding. So from the suppliers, the input, the production, right through to the consumer, and looked at areas that could either be reduced or introduced reusing or recycling, in that order. So preferably reducing, then reusing, then recycling. But
well, I was just going to say, because people jump on me often and go, well, feeding meat, oh, it's so awful, Anna, you're not trying to save the planet, You've got a few that are actually saying that dogs should be vegan to save the planet. Over to you, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Something came up recently, and a little while back I was on a kind of discussion panel about dogs and sustainability. And the point that that councillor was making was that dogs, their CO2 output was so high it was like a Land Rover every year. But the problem is with that is that they were looking at it from a perspective of just the overall CO2 output. They weren't looking at what was also saved by using the certain products, and by using raw dog food, which uses category 3 material, you're actually reducing waste or reducing export, which can reduce the CO2 emissions by like 30%.
It's really interesting. Yeah, no, I know. I read the book "Is It Time to Eat the Dog," which is a very dramatic title, and it was by this guy called Robert Vale, and that came out about 15 years ago, and it was comparing a Labrador to, like you said, an SUV, and it created a lot of debate at the time.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think the problem is that people love to simplify things and look at it in isolation, but it's not a case of being able to do that. Life's more complicated than that, unfortunately. It isn't as simple as just sourcing meat, and the animals that we source the meat from, they are part of the human consumption process, not just for dogs. So we're using what could be described as a waste product, and using that to make the raw dog food. The reason is that we can't. Humans shouldn't eat bone, especially cooked bone. We shouldn't be eating bone. So some meats, when it's taken from the animal, might have little bits of bone in. That's absolutely fine for a dog, because as you know, dogs can digest bone.
And I suppose it's stuff like the whole stomach, basically, of ruminants anyway, which is most of the meat, is great for dogs because that's raw green tripe.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's no demand for human consumption in the UK for that.
I don't think humans can eat it. I think we can
Not
eat
raw.
No, we can eat the bleached tripe.
Yeah.
Well, they love it in France.
Yeah.
It's a delicacy, actually.
Yeah. I've had it out there, actually.
Have you?
Yeah.
Was it? I've never tried it.
It was interesting.
Yes. But they eat brains and everything out there as well. That's supposed to be, cerveau. I've seen that on a menu.
I've never had that.
No. I mean, no. But, just in different cultures, do you know what I mean? So perhaps the UK is more prone to wastage.
Perhaps. I think didn't Nick say on a previous podcast that 50% of food is wasted?
Yeah. Well, I think we do. I mean, look, David Attenborough shouting about it.
Yeah.
Don't waste things. I mean, even I'm like really being conscious now. No, don't go to the shop, Hannah. You make a meal from what's in the cupboard. That old expression. I've got a couple of tomatoes. I've got some eggs. I've got a cucumber. That's a meal. And some bread. That's sort of what I eat, So there's no need to go to the shop, which, as I hate food shopping, that's a bonus.
Yeah, definitely. I hate food shopping too.
Oh, God. Yes. It's, it's all about thinking about your pet's carbon paw print, but thinking about the offsets that you, human, can make the choices around.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think, one thing is also, the ethical sourcing of meat is really, really important, because ethically raised meat, as you probably know, is much more nutritious as well for dogs and for humans. And what we need is more ethical farming in place to make sure that we've got the meat that is needed for humans, and then I'm saying waste, but it's not really waste, category 3 material to make a highly ethical dog food. That's really important. And I think if we just had no meat industry, then we would be having questions about the CO2 impact of dogs. But at the moment, while we're using essentially the category 3 material, it's not a case of just saying that this is an isolated impact. It's just not.
No. And also, it's another thing I know Nick Thompson's very passionate about, and my vet, Barbara Jones in Shropshire. She runs an organic dairy farm, and it's amazing up there, Will. She's got all this organic land, and there's just a few cows just swishing their tails in the fields, really happy. And then she grows produce on the other side of the farm and has her vet clinic sort of in the middle. I mean, it's absolutely mad with the Welsh hills in the background. But it's all about ethical, as you say, but also not industrial, basically. Yeah. Because, we're sat here on the heath, we've just seen a dragonfly go by, which is lovely. Yeah. We need insects, and they need to thrive through biodiversity, which can't really be offered if we all did these big football pitch size fields of wheat, right?
Exactly, yeah, definitely. And I think, my experience, I've never worked on a farm in the UK. I'd love to, actually, but I haven't. But I spent 9 months on an organic cattle station in Australia.
Wow.
So I worked out there a long time ago now. But it was amazing, and you know the cows were completely free. You know they were out there. We would do a yearly muster, bring everything in, you know, make sure they're all healthy and everything, and have a check up, and then out they would go again. And that was just the most sustainable way I've ever seen.
God, I bet it was great watching the dogs work, was it?
Yeah.
Because those dogs, I mean, they're real dogs. I mean, I've heard people send their cattle dogs out, Australian cattle dogs out, go, listen, see you back here, guys, you know, in an Australian accent, which I won't do, you know, in 3 days. And in 3 days' time, sure enough, they see them bringing in these cows, you know, and they've gone out all on their own, and just gone fetch the cows, because they're hardcore dogs.
Yes, they are. Yeah,
Those are.
I think the problem is most of the dogs on the station were staffies, and
Oh, right.
you know it's quite warm there, so they're mainly just lying in the shade. But you know.
Oh, I'm surprised they didn't have the cattle dogs.
But the thing is that out there, you know, that was my first experience of raw feeding, because we were living off the land out there. There was a runway. We're on a 650,000 acre plot. You know, there was kind of several hours in a helicopter to the nearest hospital, so you don't want to mess around.
No.
And we were eating, the cattle from the station, and the dogs were eating raw meat from the station, and they were, you know, the fittest, healthiest dogs I've ever seen.
And I bet they love some of the natural byproducts, like a bit of a cow's tail, or you know, fresh cow ear, to you know, prance around with, and you know, have a nice munch. Yeah, it's really interesting. And actually, I'm sure I read somewhere that dogs actually generally do live to quite a long age in Australia. Absolutely. So whether, you know, because I'm always fascinated by regional differences in feeding, like, you know, in Germany, for example, more people feed raw than they do here.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually so in this research that I put together, a lot of my findings were based on some of the information coming out of Germany, because it's actually a much more developed industry in terms of there's a lot more research that goes along with it that I can use. The UK, I think, has a little way to catch up, but the other thing is the raw feeding industry in Australia is actually quite far ahead of where we are in the UK as well.
Really?
Much more developed, and there's a much higher percentage of people feeding raw out there.
Well, that figures then. It works together with healthier dogs.
Yeah.
And that's really what everyone wants, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know, and I
definitely.
think if we're talking about offsetting, you know, surely, Will, if you consider your dog's diet as a way of offsetting vet bills,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, that's potentially, in this day and age of soaring costs, a very valuable consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tyler, so Tyler Daly, our CEO, he's actually written a piece on this recently.
Right.
And yeah, I think the vets bills and the kind of unnecessarily kind of given medication and all that kind of stuff. I think we've touched on this before.
Yeah.
You know, that's a huge impact on financial the finances of owning a dog.
And the sustainability, you know, of the pet industry, you know, because it's not all about the raw food aspect, is it, Will? You know,
No. Definitely not, no.
I mean, it's something air miles from, you know, China, and where a lot of, you know, harnesses, leads, you name it, are made. You know, that, I guess, has to be factored in. So it's always think, you know, buy British and local.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, again, this study showed that about 30% of the CO2 involved in the meat industry is from export and 10% from import.
Right.
So if you can make a more sustainable local model, you can reduce that CO2 impact by 40%. So it's a huge impact.
Yeah. Huge, really huge. We've already reduced the size of the Labrador to potentially something like a whippet, I would say. Then, if we're thinking about, you know, is it time to eat the dog? What a ridiculous title for a book. You know? But no, it's interesting. But explain a bit more, because so your MBA that you're doing, I mean, it's not only going to, I would guess, help the raw food industry per se with knowledge and models that you're working through, but of course Paleo Ridge itself. So explain a bit more then about what you've learned and what you're implementing at Paleo.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably worth going back to the basics of how I kind of... So the actual study was based on a SIPOC analysis.
Right.
That goes into suppliers, input, process, output and customer. Okay. So it looks at the entire journey about manufacturing a product right from the very, very beginning to the customer. And by breaking that down, I looked at each individual process within that and had a traffic light system which was about sustainable practices that are already in existence, kind of amber, not, you know, kind of sustainable, not greatly sustainable, and then red areas which are not sustainable. So things like uses of plastics and all sorts throughout the process. And that I went through and researched alternatives to every single area of like plastic or unsustainable practice, and put that forward in this research about how that all the plastics could be eliminated. And really the findings were that that there was a kind of 7 key changes that would be needed, and that was that capturing waste and using it was particularly at that first stage, using renewable energy, using recyclable packaging, compostable PPE in packaging, reusable packaging in the final stage for customers. So a lot of the packaging is in manufacture, because there's plastics and stuff used in manufacture, and then electronically planning the resources to reduce waste, and then at the end the 7th one was really the integration of all these resources, and the best way to do that is to keep it local, keep a local sustainable loop. So that was the key kind of top level, but whether the problem is there is a financial impact at the moment. There is a financial impact to implementing sustainable practices into the industry, which will have an impact on the final product cost. So none of this works unless the consumers demand it,
right,
and are accepting that they're going to pay a little bit more for that.
Yeah, but it's an investment. We've all got to do this, I think. We all have to do our bit. I mean, for example, I know there's other firms that, we talked about this, I'll just say polystyrene, because obviously raw food has to arrive frozen, so it has to stay cool. Yes, we know that, but it's not mandatory to use this polystyrene, which, used to drive me mad.
Yeah, that's a big issue. I think like too many firms are still using polystyrene, and they're not even putting systems in place to reuse that.
Yeah.
We use at Paleo Ridge, we use wool, which is a sustainable alternative to polystyrene. It means you can line a wooden box with that, and it's just as good as polystyrene, and we reuse it. So it's a more sustainable material, and it's reusable. So we're going back to the Mobius loop. We're reducing plastics, and we're reusing as well.
Yeah.
So we're covering 2 of those points.
Yeah, and it's the compostable, I think, which is quite a big theme as well at Paleo Ridge, with your packaging, which I must say, is fantastic. I always say to people, but make sure you get a big Tupperware. So, because once it thaws, because it's lovely, light cardboard, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's another thing here, because again, we saw each other at the Healthy Pet Show, where Nick did an amazing, Nick Thompson did an amazing presentation, and that was all about, part of it was about the correct way to defrost products. And if you actually defrost in the fridge, there's really the packaging, there's really no impact on it. I think where people have had problems in the past, and I've heard other companies really point the finger at this kind of packaging, is where it's been defrosted and left out for a really long time, and then if you're kind of leaving it in a liquid state, then it's going to permeate the packaging.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely the best way to package a raw dog food.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, my Prudence, ate quite a lot of the packaging,
Oh,
actually.
really?
Well, a delivery arrived when we were recording at home, and so I took the delivery in, left it in the hall, and I thought, what could go wrong? Got really engrossed into the podcast. After that, went into the hall, I was like, oh my gosh. And so, the big outer box.
Yeah.
Right, which is quite sturdy, isn't it? It's recycled, but it's so. She'd gotten through that, Will, and there were kilos of it was frozen solid, so it was fine. But scattered all over the hall.
Oh, lovely!
And then she'd eaten through a packet and eaten a kilo of one of the Tripe Classic ranges, frozen, So her tummy was like a balloon. Yeah, but it was okay. We used a couple of peppermint capsules and and rang Barbara, my vet, and she said, Anna, look, she's going to be fine, but just don't give her any dinner. Yeah. So, what could go wrong? This is love bull terriers. But it's I can vouch that it's definitely not toxic ink.
No, and it's vegetable inks actually.
Exactly.
So the other thing is that imagine if that was plastic.
No, gosh, if it had been plastic, it would have been a veterinary red alert emergency.
Absolutely.
So I'm highlighting this
Yeah.
because this is another massive benefit.
There is a, there's something I heard recently, and it's kind of stuck in my head a little bit, which is that I had feedback from I won't name them, a raw food supplier who uses plastic packaging.
Right.
And they had told their staff that plastic was more sustainable than paper because of how paper breaks down. But I think that's kind of crazy because, paper can be recycled, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And when it's in the recycling process, the bits that can't be used to remake paper, it's actually used as a pH neutralizer for fields.
Right.
So it's got a very sustainable kind of use for the waste material there. And like I said, it can be reused 4, 5, 6 times depending on the use afterwards. And we just don't know enough about like how plastic breaks down because, as you know, like it can take up to thousands of years for the plastic to break down. And so we know that certain plastics break down and make microplastics, which I think is everyone's been made aware of, especially with fishes containing a lot of microplastics.
No, they're the dangerous ones, really.
Yeah.
That we are consuming them. Yeah, it's very worrying.
Yeah, it's quite sobering, I think, and I just think that there's a problem there about the messaging that goes out because it's confusing, isn't it? And I think there is a problem. Do you remember the big thing came out? I don't know how long it was, 20 years ago, about eating 5 a day. Well, when they did the research, it was 7 or 8 fruit a day that we should be eating, but they didn't think that people would do it. So they went for 5 a day because they thought that people might actually do that.
It's really interesting, but you do wonder with all this sustainability and recyclable that it's become, like anything, a marketing gimmick.
Absolutely. I think the term is greenwashing.
Right.
Greenwashing is just kind of using sustainability or a sustainability argument to justify something else. And that's a great example of it because saying that plastic is more sustainable than paper, which is just baseless, is a crazy example of you make a decision then justify it afterwards. Just don't that kind of misinformation should be governed in some way, I think.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Now, the other thing, though, is interesting because at Paleo Ridge, am I right in thinking you're soon going to be repurposing some of the waste in the manufacture process to offset your electricity consumption from the grid?
So this comes back to more of our suppliers because this is where there are wastes, especially there's a lot of water used in the production process, and not from us but from our suppliers. And there's a couple of our suppliers have actually put what's called anaerobic wastewater treatment plants in, and this creates a biogas that can be used for energy. And there's at least 2 of our suppliers now.
So are these farmers?
These are farms
Yeah.
or abattoirs that have put this in place, so they're actually using waste to create an energy source.
Right.
It also cleans the water, so the water can be reused in the manufacturing process. This has been put into place into packaging suppliers as well. So in the paper industry, it uses a lot of water. That's a big criticism of the paper industry. But they've put cleaning and reuse processes in to use that water. So for us, what it means is that we need to be very aware of what processes are in place for our suppliers so that we can drive this kind of sustainable operation by preferring to use these sustainable companies, which is what we do. The 2 that I know of that have anaerobic waste systems and ethical farming processes, we prefer to use them because they're the most ethical. That's the most ethical meat, the most sustainable meat that we can source. So it's really important.
Yeah, and you're very, very transparent with traceability and everything. I've seen at Paleo Ridge, and we talked about something else, related to keeping your pet's carbon paw print down, which is, of course, not importing or not buying products that have been imported from China and made out of very low-grade plastic that arguably can be quite toxic for your dog as they've got chemicals on and so on. Because you use ground hemp seed, don't you?
We do, yeah. Yes.
So does that mean hemp does grow in the UK?
Yeah, there's actually a really established hemp market in the UK. a lot of like lettuce growers also grow
right.
hemp.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's quite a like it's a very sustainable industry.
It's a very flexible crop, you know, because they make
yeah.
ropes, don't they, from hemp, and loads of dog
Exactly.
toys can be made from hemp, which
Yeah.
is natural, non-toxic, and ideally made in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes back to the same thing as with any raw material, as it were. And I don't like to refer to animals as raw material, but unfortunately, as you look at it in this process, it is unfortunately a raw material. But it's using everything. You know, we should be using absolutely everything from our farming with animals, with the crops and all sorts. And you know, with hemp, we're using the seeds that's going into our products, and then the strands and the cellular fibre can be used for even paper or like ropes and clothes and all sorts. It's amazing. It's an amazing product, really.
Yeah, no, totally. It's so interesting, actually. You know, it makes me think you could even make toys. I know some vegetarians listening now probably, you know, pass out. I hope not. But, you know, for example, from the skin of animals, you know, it's leather, which I know is arguably controversial, but again, it's a byproduct that needs to be used. I mean, Mr. Binks is proud of his leather collar he's wearing. It's Italian leather, obviously. But you know where I'm going. So why don't we make more dog toys out of leather?
I think it just basically comes back to, you know, every part of the animal should be used. Every part, you know, even the parts that you really wouldn't have thought could be used. This is why there's the categorization system. I think, you know, I've talked a lot about category 3 meats, and that is the meat that is not suitable for human consumption. But there are, you know, different categories. There's category 1 and category 2, and category 1 material can be used for combustion, for energy.
Right.
So basically, you know, it's burnt for energy. That's the least valuable use of a material, really.
Right.
But category 2 material can be used for compost and fertilizer. And you know, there's a big discussion about a lack of fertilizer at the moment in the UK for farming, and this could be like a really good answer there.
So what is category 2? Give an example of what something would
there's
be.
like stomach contents,
Right.
and you know, unusable parts of an animal, really. I think category 1 material tends to be a lot of like sick animals, so you really wouldn't want to use that in case of spreading like disease or anything. But and so that doesn't get used for any kind of pet or human consumption. But category 2 material, it doesn't have to be incinerated. It can be used for, like I said, compost and fertiliser.
Yeah, because that's so important, because otherwise I suppose artificial fertiliser actually goes against the grain because it will be creating CO2 in its manufacture.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, you know, the alternative is that we just landfill this, or we, you know, just burn the category 2 material, which could be used for, like I said, fertilizer. It's not a sustainable way to go about things. It's, you know, it's just wasting a product. And you know, again, going back to the SIPOC analysis, it's just looking at like waste streams that happen and trying to reduce that, and looking at what is that waste, why is it there, and how can you reduce or remove it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, because people are discussing, you know, really, are dogs worth it, you know, out there? You know, that's another discussion, I think, on the radio interview you did, which I tuned into.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they were saying, you know, well, are we going to have any Irish wolfhounds? There aren't that many in the world anyway, actually, I must say. They are a vulnerable British breed, sadly, the largest breed of dog. You know, I mean, what do you think, Will? Do you think the Vista in 20 years will be lots of little Mr. Binks-sized dogs?
It's really hard to say. I think there's a real impact that we're seeing right now of the post kind of pandemic, you know, the impact on especially children. I think, you know, seeing a lot, and our mental health is really, really important as well. Dogs play a massive part in that. They're part of the family, and I think, yes, you know, there's a big argument to be made about having smaller dogs, but you know, do we want to see these dogs disappear? I
No,
don't want
I mean,
to, you know.
no, I'm very passionate. I hope it doesn't really come to that. I think, you know, the world of the pedigree dog has become so diluted with the surge in designer crossbreeds and, you know, people just getting any old dog, you know, during the pandemic because that was the thing, you had to have one. They really became more of an accessory than ever before, ironically, and we're seeing them all being ditched or resold on dog websites at the moment and shoved, you know, from pillar to post, which is awful, you know, awful. And, you know, the elderly with dogs, I mean, look, you know, I think I read a study that said that, you know, in the elderly, those with dogs go to their GP 30% less than those without dogs. You know, simple, you know, studies like that surely prove a dog's worth. And look, we've been living side by side with them. You know, I know you're on my page, but, you know, the thought of not having man's best friend,
Exactly.
what will we do? We'll be lost. It will all go wrong.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, I just can't imagine not having. So my dog Misty, I couldn't imagine not having her.
No. You get so attached, and we spend so much time researching. Why do we get so attached? Why do they devastate us? You know, when they go. You know, and we can't seem to get to the real bottom of it. It's this indelible elastic band connection that is just there through centuries of domestication and evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to go back to the point of sustainability, it's kind of, there's always going to be a balance between, I keep calling it, you know, category 3 material.
Right.
The material that can't be used for human consumption, that can be used for animal consumption. You know, it's sustainable as long as we're using that material. I think if there's a point at which we're having to cull animals for dog consumption, then that is a totally different argument. But the point is that that's not the case. You know, we're using what is essentially otherwise a waste material, and that is the fundamentals of it being a sustainable model. There's loads of things that we can do to improve, and I think everybody should be trying to improve. I mentioned before we were on air about the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Oh yeah.
And you know, these goals have been put together by the UN. A tremendous amount of research put into them. I don't think that, like, day to day, a lot of people know about these Sustainable Development Goals. But you know, SDG, as they are called for short, you know, SDG 9 is really about putting together you know, sustainable industry and putting processes and everything in place to be sustainable. And it will take the whole industry to work together. It will take Paleo Ridge working with, you know, the other raw dog brands, working with the suppliers and consumers to bring this kind of level of understanding right up to a point where consumers desire it, they want it, they're willing to pay more, and you know, there must be some sort of certification or something that we can see that tangibly says that it's a sustainable product. At the moment, that is probably the missing piece of the puzzle.
So interesting. In a way, I know we're running a bit out of time now, but Will, it reminds me of us going back in time, you know, because in the olden days we would have gone hunting, you know, Will would have speared a Tyrannosaurus Rex, obviously, or something, do you know what I mean? And then you brought it back, but we would have used everything.
Absolutely.
And they would have used it for compost as well as for, you know, the latest outfit with a nice skin, real leopard print. I hate the thought of that, actually, not real, fake.
Yeah.
But, you know, back then, so it's
and there was no
so
plastic.
interesting. And there was no plastic.
Yeah.
There was no processed food. You know,
everything would biodegrade, or you know, everything would break down. You know, the only lasting archaeology that we see from, you know, is kind of rocks and metal that's been manipulated. You know, we're kind of on this spike, which we just keep seeing going up and up. It did flatten a little bit over the pandemic period, but you know, CO2 going into the atmosphere, which is creating this kind of acceleration effect of global warming. You know, that is kind of very tangible right now, and I think we have to be trying to eliminate plastics as one of the key things. It's one of the least recyclable materials. It's one of the most CO2 outputting ways of manufacturing. Even in recycling, there's a lot of waste and there's a lot of CO2 output. And it's not sustainable. We have to change things. So.
Yep, so everyone think hemp toys.
Yeah.
Think, really research your raw food supplier. How sustainable are they is what I'd say, Will. And,
challenge them. Get on the
challenge
phone.
them, yeah. That's it, well, look, we love Paleo Ridge, and I'm really proud perhaps to be doing my bit to keep our paw prints as carbon friendly and neutral as possible. Thank
Perfect.
you, Will.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, Anna.
Hey, Mr. Binks, that's our show. What did you think? Yes, I thought you'd be interested to understand that the food you eat is as sustainably created as it possibly can be. And you're right, it is time for Woof of the Week. I know you're small, Mr. Binks, which is good, but it would be awful if we couldn't have big dogs as well. So being aware of our carbon paw print and sustainability is key. And I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, go on, rate and review the show wherever you tune into your podcasts. Thanks again to Will Green, and all the links are in our show notes. Thanks, of course, to Mike Hanson, my producer. Find out more about him at Pod People UK. And for me, I'm at Anna Webb Dogs. What's that, Mr. Binks? Yes, you're right. We will be in your feed again next Sunday. So why don't you subscribe now? That way, you'll never miss another show. Bye for now.